Morningside's beautiful campus. And to my fellow Mustangs, welcome to what will no doubt be an amazing discussion. There is no better place to discuss civic engagement and politics than right here at Morningside College. Because as most of you know, Morningside's mission includes a commitment to cultivating students who have a dedication to civic responsibility. That's why public and experiential events like these are so important to the Morningside community. Events like these are a part of the Morningside experience. Before we dive into tonight's discussion, I would like to thank President Reinders, the Board of Directors, and the Colonel Bud Day Center for providing the opportunity for us to meet face-to-face with our political leaders. Today, all of us have an incredible opportunity to meet a presidential candidate and learn more about former Congressperson Beto O'Rourke and his vision for the future. Beto O'Rourke is a former U.S. House Representative from Texas who served 3 consecutive terms. With many legislative accomplishments on his side, O'Rourke announced his run for presidency in March of 2019. Please join me in welcoming Beto O'Rourke.
How's everybody doing? Good to see you. Good to be with you. Thank you for providing me some furniture that I can stand on as I address you and take your questions. And Allie, thank you for the introduction. Morningside, thank you for having us out and for facilitating a conversation that we had with some of the students a little bit earlier and then from some community leaders in the community before that. Really good questions and even better solutions brought to the table to ensure that we're coming up with everyone, with everything that we've got at this defining moment of truth for this community and for this country. No pressure, but the future is counting on us at this moment, right? And we cannot be found wanting. And what I have found so far in getting to meet you, those who go to school here, those who help to ensure that this experience is great for those who go to school here, is that the leadership that we need in this country is found right here in this room. Let no one tell you that you are the leaders of tomorrow or that we're looking forward to the great things that you're going to do ahead. You're the leaders right now of this moment, and the urgency that you feel around every single challenge and opportunity in this country is exactly what we need. If you think about it, we have never been as divided or as polarized or as riven by partisanship as we are in this moment, at least not in my lifetime. And the challenges before us have never been greater. I was just listening to Kyle, who asked me a question about the Missouri River. And the Missouri River Basin has seen runoff that is 4 times its average and the greatest levels of runoff that we've seen for as long as we've been keeping records in this part of the country. We have a patchwork of defenses that have proven ineffective to help those farmers and people and lives and livestock that have been affected and in some cases consumed. And though we are grateful to the people of Iowa, many of whom we learned in the Ames paper today have taken feed and hay over to those farmers in Nebraska to help them out while they can. What we need right now more than anything else is disaster relief for every single one of those affected farms, to include the stored grain that was spoiled in these floods, grain that was in part stored because of trade wars and tariffs imposed by this president that has disproportionately affected the farmers of this region, who are bearing the brunt of a trade war that we cannot win unless we include our allies who've had our backs turned on them by this president, whether it's Mexico or Canada or the European Union. I ask you, when has this country ever gone to war and succeeded without going to war with allies and friends? I want to make sure that we are successful in every endeavor, but in almost every instance it requires bringing every single one of us and our allies and friends around the world to the table. This disaster relief needs to be followed up by an investment in the infrastructure, holding the Army Corps of Engineers accountable for what they have failed to do so far, but making sure that we have the resources going forward to invest in the protection for our families, for our people, for our farms, for our way of life. The fact that we feed not just this country, but so much of the rest of the world. And rural America, if it is to continue to thrive or even survive, must be partnered with by the rest of America. So showing up, listening, and learning from those whom I hope to serve is what has brought me here to this community, every community we have visited so far in this campaign to serve you as the next President of the United States of America. These challenges, which continue beyond the immediate after effect of these floods, or the repair that needs to take place going forward, or the investment in infrastructure that we need to make, must also look to the generations that will succeed us. Our kids and grandkids, their kids and grandkids, who will look back on this moment in 2019, this room here in Sioux City, and will know that we still had time, the scientists say 10 years, within which to act, to keep this planet from warming yet another degree Celsius, after which you will be able to live nowhere near the banks of the Missouri. Or in Houston, Texas, in my home state, where 58 inches of rain fell from the sky just in 2017. It's the largest rainfall record in a single storm since we've been keeping them in this country. And it was the third 500-year flood in that community in just the last 5 years. Now, the people of Houston should be good for the next 1,500 years by my math, but they are not. Because those scientists say that if we continue to warm as a cause of our own emissions and excesses and inaction, those floods in Houston, those floods here in Nebraska and in Iowa, those fires in California, that drought that precipitated the greatest civil war in the Middle East, in Syria, that produced the greatest humanitarian disaster since World War II, the droughts through which our farmers are trying to persist, not just here, but in Texas and the Panhandle, where they went through 5 years of drought, all of that will become much more worse, more profoundly devastating, will compromise our ability to grow our own food, our own fiber, to live in the communities that we call home today. If we are going to free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, we are going to convert fully to renewable energy, wind and solar and biofuels, in which you lead here in Iowa. We are going to make the most of this moment and reassert our global leadership, and once again become the indispensable nation, convening the other countries of the world around intractable problems, because we alone can lead by example and bring them together, because we are not a nation defined by ethnicity or race, but by an idea and an experiment. The last best hope of earth is the way that Abraham Lincoln described us. And if those words were ever true, they are true at this moment. So I want to make sure that whether you are a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, that you know that you are in the right place right now. Whether you come from a small town or a big city, I want to make sure that we come together. If we're going to face climate change, and we're going to avert the worst of the catastrophes that await our kids, it's going to take all of us. If we're going to make sure that every single one of us is well enough to live up to our full potential, to attend college, to go to school the next day, to work a job or start a business or start a punk rock band or write a piece of poetry or whatever you are supposed to do in your life, and if we're going to achieve universal, guaranteed, high-quality healthcare, it cannot be a solution imposed by one political party in this country alone. It means that we listen to and try to serve and work with everyone. It's the spirit of compromise, though that is a 4-letter word in Washington, D.C. right now. For the 6 years, as Ali said, that I was in Congress, every single one of them was in the minority. And the only way to accomplish anything of any significance was to find that Republican colleague with whom we could agree, or maybe compromise a little bit, and find something greater than what we have right now, not allowing the perfect to become the enemy of the good. We found that veterans who came back from service in Vietnam or Iraq and Afghanistan with an other than honorable discharge were prevented from setting foot in the VA and getting the care that could save their lives. Because though we are losing 20 veterans a day, every single day in this country, by their own hand, the majority of them have been unable or were unwilling to go in the VA, and those OTH veterans could not get in at all. Their suicide rate was double the general rate of suicide for veterans in this country. We wrote a bill, the Honor Our Commitment Act. And that bill, as well written as it was, if I may say so, was going absolutely nowhere unless we could find a Republican with whom we could work. And we did. And I came off a little bit of what my version of ideal was. He did as well. We talked to our colleagues in the House of Representatives, got it passed 435-0, got it passed in the Senate as well, and then signed into law by Donald J. Trump, a man with whom I agree on almost nothing. And yet we found enough common ground to help our veterans, to improve access to care, outcomes, and saving lives in the process. That is the path forward for this country. At a moment of historic division and polarization, we don't need more of the same. No more meanness or pettiness or personal attacks. No more making you angry or afraid of yourself or one another based on differences in your race or your ethnicity or your sexual orientation or the whom you care. We can decide once and for all, right now, that those differences don't matter, and whatever you are, beyond anything else, we are Americans first, and we have a chance to act that way going forward. So, if healthcare for everyone in a country that right now is losing too many of us to things like diabetes, to the flu, to curable cancers, in the year 2019, in the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most medically advanced country the planet or world history has ever known, we're going to ensure that every single one of us can see a primary care provider. Or in a country whose largest, or one of its largest, providers of mental health care is the county jail system, where people get arrested on purpose to treat their schizophrenia or their bipolar disorder or their depression. Universal health care is going to mean access to mental health care. And in a country that is in the midst of a crisis of maternal mortality, 3 times as deadly for women of color, universal health care is going to mean every woman makes her own decisions about her own body and has access to the health care that ensures that she can. Let's going to take all of this coming together. If we're going to revive rural America or allow it to continue to thrive, we're going to have to listen to and partner with rural America. Traveling, yeah, let's hear it. Thank you. Traveling Texas, traveling Iowa, I'm learning from those whom I wish to serve, who are bringing the solutions to their challenges to the table at these conversations. Farmers here who have shown me that they've been able to free themselves from a reliance on commodity markets over which they have no control by adding value to what they grow and helping to free us from our dependence on fossil fuels. Other farmers who suggest if we really want to meet the challenge of climate change, then make it profitable for farmers to plant cover crops, make it profitable to use precision tilling and farming, make it possible by freeing technologies and markets to them to do their part to capture carbon out of the air as we invest in solar and wind and other renewable technologies. Let's make sure that we're investing not just in the water infrastructure that we need on the banks of the Missouri. Let's make sure that we're investing in the infrastructure of our communities, including broadband internet in every part of rural America. Try looking for a job, or getting those goods to market, or finishing your education, or finding a date tonight on Tinder without access to the internet. Damn near impossible. And what I've heard from rural America is no one is looking for a handout, or for sympathy, or for pity. They're looking for a partner. Driven home to me in Silverton, Texas, where we were talking about the fact that half of rural Texas cannot get online reliably today. I was talking about investing in that infrastructure, but before I could finish my sentence, a gentleman stood up and he said, I was in first grade in 1937. Our town did not have electricity in Silverton, Texas. But then Congressman LBJ and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Rural Electrification Administration partnered with, didn't give us anything, partnered with our community and the co-op that we formed so that I could read under electric candlelight the day before first grade, just like the big kids in Chicago, in Tokyo, in London, everywhere else around the world. People believed in us. We mattered. We counted. And oh, by the way, From that day forward, you can bet my daddy was a yellow dog Democrat. Because we used to show up in those communities, show up for people, and deliver for them after we had shown up. But it's going to take all of us working together. I was just talking to Bernie about school teachers and educators in this state and across this country. Get a load of this. In Texas, nearly half of educators, those are the school teachers in the classroom, the cafeteria workers, the school bus drivers, the therapists, the counselors, the nurses, the librarians, are working a second or a third job just to make ends meet. In so many parts of the country right now, this is true, and probably in too many cases in Iowa as well. You would agree that they have the most important job in front of them. That child whose lifelong love of learning, once unlocked, will make them unstoppable, will make this country unbeatable. Now, the only reason that we named our oldest son Ulysses is because we did not have the guts to name him Odysseus. Reading the Odyssey unlocked new opportunities in life for me. It gave me a different way of thinking about the world, about myself, about my experiences, about how you tell stories. At El Paso High, last time I checked, they're reading the abridged version of the Odyssey. Those teachers already struggling against the odds, having to work that second or third job out of their own pocket on average, pulling out $800 a year, not just for school decorations, not just for supplies for the kid who forgot to bring them, but a hot meal for that child who's on free and reduced breakfast and lunch, but has nothing to look forward to at the end of the day. That new set of clothes for the kid who shows up in the same jeans and t-shirt Monday through Thursday, by Friday, out of her own pocket. That teacher, knowing that that child's ability to learn is connected to his dignity, his own self-worth, buys that kid a new set of clothes. That teacher now is having to set aside 16 days for standardized test prep, so they read the abridged version of the Odyssey. And I'm meeting too many teachers right now, and this is really troubling, who are telling me that they will not allow their sons or their daughters to enter the profession. The high stakes, standardized, high pressure tests, the low pay, the inability to look forward to a future that they can count on, they don't want to see that for their kids. So if we're going to bring the very best out of all of us, we're going to ensure that there is true economic opportunity in this country, we need a world-class pre-K through 12 public education system. And that begins with those educators. It continues here at Morningside. I want to make sure that every kid who graduates from high school is college ready and ready to go on to higher education without accruing debt, considering the fact that we have $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt in this country right now. The default rate is about 10%, so that means a hell of a lot of people are having a really hard time making it, because this kind of debt is the one kind of debt that you will never shake until you have paid it off or until you are in the grave. Let's stop digging the hole. Let's make sure that if you want to pursue community college, you do it free. If you're going to go to a publicly financed, public-facing institution, you do that without debt. If you've already taken on some of that debt, and on average, we're graduating seniors from college with $40,000 on their back, and that is just an average. This president is trying to zero out the public service loan forgiveness program. He's trying to undermine federal support for higher education to build a $30 billion, 30-foot high, 2,000-mile wall that we absolutely do not need at this moment. Instead, let's refinance that debt that you're holding. If you're willing to work at the VA, help one of those veterans who is returning from battle or returned 50 years ago to a country that did not understand or appreciate his service. If you're willing to treat their post-traumatic stress disorder, their traumatic brain injury, their military sexual trauma in an organization, the VA, that is 45,000 positions short today, then I want to wipe clean your student debt. Reward you for that public service, for standing up for those who put their lives on the line for this country. I also want to make sure that everyone can participate in the decisions that we're going to need to make together. Now, whether it's climate, whether it's immigration, whether it's the wars that these veterans have fought, that we continue to fight 18 years in and counting in Afghanistan, 27 years in and counting in Iraq. I want to make sure everyone can participate in the decisions and the discussion. And in this country, too many people are locked out of our democracy. This idea that we're all created equal, we have equal opportunity, that it's one person and one vote is justifiably seen as a lie by those who cannot participate right now. My home state was 50th in the country in voter turnout, not because we like our democracy any less than you do here, but because our state legislature literally drew people out of a congressional district, therefore a reason to vote, therefore their democracy, solely based on their race or their ethnicity. We have people in Texas who can use their permit to carry a firearm to prove who they are at the ballot box, but cannot use their student ID at the University of Texas at Austin to prove who they are at the ballot box. If we had a new Voting Rights Act to ensure that every single one of us could vote and that vote would count, if we had same-day voter registration and automatic voter registration when you turn 18 years old, if we ended the practice of gerrymandering, where members of Congress choose their own voters instead of the other way around, and we got big money out of our politics and out of our democracy, we would be thriving. But this political democracy is also contingent upon one other thing, and that is economic democracy. Theodore Roosevelt said something to the same effect in the last progressive moment in this country's history that was provoked by the last extraordinary concentration of wealth and power and privilege. He understood, as we do today, that unless you can see a future for yourself or your child in this country, then the United States will have no future as a democracy. That wealth, that power, corporate control at a time that they are treated as citizens and people and money as speech, so that they can spend unlimited amounts of money purchasing the outcomes of elections and legislation, that power must be broken up. Yes. We must make sure that political action committees and special interests are not able to obtain undue influence and outcomes in our democracy. And we've got to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to get ahead. That means that one job, not just for educators and school teachers, but for all of us, one job should be enough. If you're willing to work 40 hours a week, contribute your best, find purpose and function in your life and in your work, you should not have to work a second or a third job to make ends meet. If you want to take time off to have a child, to take care of your folks, to take care of yourself, we should have paid family leave in every single part of this country. In Iowa, though you are first in so many other things, you're 35th right now in the disparity between what men are paid and what women are paid for doing the exact same work, providing the exact same value, equal pay for every single one of us, regardless of gender. Ensuring that no one can be discriminated against based on their race or their sexual orientation. Again, in some states in this union, you can be fired legally for being gay. Refuse the opportunity to adopt a child out of foster care because of your sexual orientation. We need to sign into law the Equality Act so that the full civil rights of every single one of us is respected. And when we're talking about civil rights, let's make sure that we mention this. This country hosts the largest prison population per capita on the face of the planet. A prison population that is disproportionately comprised of people of color, too many there for nonviolent drug crimes, and what we know is that Americans of different races and ethnicities use illegal drugs, sell illegal drugs at the same rate. But only some are more likely than others to be arrested, to do time in prison, to upon release have to check a box on every employment application form saying that they have that conviction, making it less likely that they get that job, are disqualified for student loans to attend universities, perhaps this one as well, will not have the ability to better themselves through higher education. If we're going to confront this, we're going to have to confront the entire problem. It doesn't mean that we only end the prohibition on marijuana, which we should. It doesn't mean that we only expunge the arrest records for those caught for possession of a substance that is legal in more than half the country right now, though we should do that as well. It means that we end the cash bail system. It means that we end for-profit prisons. It means that we end the war on drugs that is becoming a war on people. And it also means that we have some real structural, foundational, systemic challenges in this country. I talked about those kids in a kindergarten classroom, some of whom are 10 months back in reading comprehension on day 1, 12 months back in math. They may be the children of those single parents who are working 2 and 3 jobs and do not have time to read to their kids. But in that same classroom, a child of color at 5 years old is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled as a white kid. The schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline, which I assumed, because I know nothing about it as a white man, might have begun in high school, begins in kindergarten, when you're 5 years old. This history of our country includes a history of criminalizing people based on their race. It's not easy or comfortable to talk about, but it's incredibly necessary if we're going to fix it. It will not be enough to reform around the edges if we don't tell the true story of the history of this country. So we're willing to confront the legacy of slavery, of segregation, of Jim Crow, of continuing suppression around this country. We will begin the process to repair this country, and we will ensure, I hope, that we do not continue to visit injustice on our fellow Americans going forward. All of this is going to take all of us. As my friend Paul sent me in a text on the first week of this campaign, we cannot meet these challenges by half measure or with only half the country. The divisions between us of race or party or geography or how many generations you've been here or whether you just got here yesterday, we have to dissolve those or not allow them to stand in our way. We have to come together, not just to secure the nomination, not just to defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020, as important as that might be. We've got to come together, not against anyone or anything or any other political party, but for one another, for this country, and for the generations that will succeed us, the people of the future. That's why I'm running to serve you as the President of the United States of America. Thank you all for having us out here today. Very grateful. Looking forward to hearing what's on your mind. Cynthia Connell's got a microphone. If you've got a question, a comment, a suggestion, an idea that will make me a better candidate or a better servant to you once in office, please lay it on me. Here we go.
How did you realize you wanted to become the President of the United States?
So Amy, my wife, and I were thinking about this a lot. And we were thinking about our kids, Ulysses, who I told you is our firstborn, 12 years old, Molly, his sister, who's 10, Henry, who's 8. And those kids and our opportunity to be good parents to them, and hopefully raise them to be good adults, that's our most important job. And so that almost disqualified us in our minds from doing this. But then we also thought about those kids who in the year 2050 will not even be the age that I am right now. And they'll be looking back on Amy and me, the people of 2019, on all of us, and they will know the challenges that we faced, including the existential challenge of climate change. And they will want to know how we accounted for ourselves. What did we do while there was still time to act? And I'm not going to be giving them excuses about hoping that somebody else was going to get it done, or doing my part by, voting or raising them or taking care of them. I want them to be proud of us, the people of 2019, upon whom so much rests, including their future. So those kids, in some ways, kind of pushed us out the door, out here to Iowa to be meeting with you. We're going to have a very good story to tell them at the end of the day about what we did when everything was on the line. Thank you for the question. Following Cynthia, who's got the microphone.
Hi. So in this political climate with our current president's tactics, how is the Democratic candidate, if you won the nomination, would you combat or cut through the criticisms from the other side that aim to detract from the talks on actual policy?
Yeah. So this president, who has described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, asylum seekers, and think about what would compel you to scoop up your baby girl or your little boy and walk 2,000 miles, maybe spend some of it not inside of a train but on the roof of a train, called La Bestia, the length of Mexico, fleeing violence and maybe certain death in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. Things have to be really bad for you to do that. And yet we met them not with open arms, not with salvation, not with refuge, but in so many cases deporting that mother who risked her very life to bring her child to this country, back to the very country from which she fled.
Thank God.
Put that child in a cage, separated them in some cases with no prospect or hope of ever being reunited. That policy follows the rhetoric of a president who not only describes immigrants as rapists and criminals, but as animals and an infestation. Now, I might expect someone to describe another human being as an infestation in the Third Reich. I would not expect it in the United States of America. So, when you use words like that, when we call Klansmen and white supremacists and neo-Nazis very fine people, when we seek to ban the travel of all Muslims on the pretext that they are somehow more dangerous or violent than anyone else of any other tradition of faith, and on the day that the president signed his executive order seeking to ban that travel, the mosque in Victoria, Texas was burned to the ground. Hate crimes are up each one of the last 3 years in this country. There's a real price and consequence. And so you ask, how should the Democratic nominee match this rhetoric and this kind of leadership, if that's what we can call it? If we do more of the same, if we descend into that pettiness and meanness and those personal attacks, I'm not sure that we can win. I don't know that anyone is as gifted as this president in that style of campaigning. But if we elevate the conversation to bring all of us out of our differences, focused on our ambitions and our aspirations, those things that we're going to do together only through our courage and our resolve and our service and our sacrifice, that's how I want to be defined and distinguished in the world and in history. Then I think not only can we win this election, as important as that is, but we can pull this country together around the work ahead. So that's the way that I want to campaign for everybody, with everybody. Thank you.
Hi there. What is your view on the Electoral College, and do you think we need to get rid of it?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer, and I had a really good question in Denison earlier today. A woman who worried that rural communities and more rural states would lose out in the abolition of an electoral college. And I hope that we struck upon a compromise that may or may not work, and I'll try it out on you. What if states selected their electors proportionate based on the popular vote in that state? So right now, many states have a winner-take-all system. And so those states are already spoken for, and there's no reason for the Republican or the Democratic nominee to show up, because they're not going to win the overall vote or any of those electors. If you had to fight for every single one of those electors, then you'd be showing up not just in Iowa, in Ohio, in Michigan, and Florida, you'd be showing up in Texas and South Carolina and Massachusetts and California. More people would have a seat at the table. But if we want to see greater participation, then we're going to have to get through this explanation. How did the person who got 3 million more votes in the last election end up the loser? If we want everyone to participate, if we really believe in one person, one vote, we want to understand how we got to the Electoral College in the first place, which may very well have been the result of a compromise with slave states, who are counting those slaves as 3/5 of a person for apportionment in the House of Representatives, the same math that we were used to select the number of electors they had in that state. We also got to understand that story and why we have this in the first place. So I believe in the most direct democracy that we can get. I would like to see the abolition of the Electoral College. If we can't do that, how about proportional votes based on the popular vote in a given state? Thank you for allowing me to step up to that.
What are you going to do for unions?
Talked about young people being college ready when they graduate from high school. I think they should also be career ready. When we went to Fort Madison High School, getting to spend some time in that welding shop where there are more kids than there are spaces, because it has become so popular, because upon high school graduation, not only do you have a diploma, You have 1 year towards a welding certification under your belt. They help you go to Southeast Community College debt-free through their excellent counselors that they have at Fort Madison High. And you're able to get that certification and begin earning a real wage. Meeting with carpenters and other trades, those apprenticeships provide the purpose and the function and the dignity that so many Americans are looking for. And yes, for those 18 or 19-year-olds who are about to go into the workforce who do not want to go to college, for those service members who come back from being as essential as you can be as a human being, a member of a military unit, everything that you do will determine your fate and the fate of the other members in that unit. Coming back to your hometown, I want to make sure that you also have purpose and function there. A union, this Helmets to Hard Hats program, can be the path to do that. And then how about those who have finished raising their children and want to return to the workforce, or whose jobs have been automated out of existence? These unions and these apprenticeships provide a path forward for them. So at a time in this country where we've seen the power of unions diminish, I want to strengthen them. Not only is it good for the unions, not only is it good for the union member, it's terrific for our economy and our prospects as a country going forward. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
We have a horrible healthcare system here in our Republican-led, for the most part, Iowa. What is your platform for universal health care?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Privatizing Medicaid certainly isn't the path forward, as you all can demonstrate. Failing to expand it, as we've shown in Texas, inexplicably at a time that the federal government was willing to pay 100 cents on the dollar for expansion. Losing, as I mentioned earlier, school teachers to the flu who have insurance, but in Weatherford, Texas, didn't have $119 in her checking account, which was the co-pay after her insurance had already kicked in for flu medication. She's now dead. It's not right, and it's incredibly expensive. As we allow people without insurance, as they get closer to the end of their lives, to obtain health care in the jails or in our emergency rooms, it is exponentially more expensive, and the outcomes are not as good as they would have been otherwise. So let's fully expand Medicaid in every single one of our states, publicly and not privately. Let's bring down the cost of prescription drugs. Let's ensure that Medicare can use its purchasing power and leverage to drive down the cost. And if we're unwilling to do that, or even if we are, allow you and me to buy our drugs from Canada if we're able to find a lower cost in that country. Let's make sure that we ban the use of political action committees in this country, because they are the explanation for so much of what is wrong in the U.S. and our healthcare system. I talked about our criminal justice system, our prison population, folks rotting behind bars for possession of marijuana. Purdue Pharma markets opioids to this country, a country that lost more than 70,000 people to drug overdose deaths just last year, marketed them saying that they were not addicted, and those prescribers and doctors prescribed them accordingly. You've got people, including veterans, who are hooked on legally prescribed opioids, their prescription cut off. They've come to town halls just like this one in El Paso and said, I'm buying heroin on the street because it is the only way I can treat myself. That guy, that gal, they're not criminals. We did this to them. Purdue Pharma, in part, did this to them. And no one in that corporation has paid a price or spent a single night in jail. So I want to make sure that there's real accountability in our system of criminal justice, in our healthcare system. I want to make sure that we allow those who want to enroll in Medicare to choose to do that. And those who have private employer-sponsored plans who like them to be able to keep them. I want to make sure that Medicare ultimately becomes the insurance provider of choice in this country by investing in it and strengthening it. But I know that we cannot get there overnight, and so focusing on prescription medications, bringing down the cost of premiums and deductibles, expanding Medicaid, offering Medicare as a choice, that's the path that we can take to get there. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
Hello. Many of your critics often believe that you're not clear or firm on your policy positions. What should we as supporters and caucusers say to rebut these claims?
Well, I'm going to do my best to continue to answer these questions as directly as I can. On criminal justice, I gave you 5 or 6 points that we need to do very specific things within the larger question of facing the legacy of the way that this country was built and and on whose backs it was built. On healthcare, some specific steps that we could take that end into something that I have been told is called Medicare for America, where you can choose to buy in to Medicare. On our educational system, starting education universally at pre-K for every kid, making community college free, higher education debt-free at public-serving, public-facing institutions. On immigration, let's start by freeing every single dreamer from any fear of deportation by making them U.S. citizens in the country. On border security, let's invest in our ports of entry. Let's invest in our communities. Let's treat people with dignity and respect. When it comes to trade, let's make sure that we don't go into these trade wars alone, that these tariffs produce reciprocal tariffs that hurt our farmers, our producers, our ranchers, our growers, our communities, our country. Let's end these trade wars and support our farmers. Let's invest in infrastructure, whether it's along the Missouri River or the Rio Grande, or broadband internet, or highways, or mass transit systems. When it comes to climate change, let's make sure that we free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuel. Invest in renewable energy, wind and solar. Follow the lead that you're taking right here in Iowa. So on any given issue that you raise, I will do my best to answer it with as much detail as I can. If I am lacking, I will learn from you and others who are experts in what this means to your life. That's why I'm here in the first place. So I hope some of that gives you some that you can use in these caucuses, but I'm always available if you want more. Yeah, thanks.
First, thank you for the sacrifice that you and your family are making to run for president. I have been very fortunate to have a wonderful career and now have a sound retirement, Medicare, Social Security, recognizing that your goals, which I support, require funding. This president has created a massive deficit that will make 2008, in my opinion, look like a cakewalk if we don't take steps as the new president begins their term to fix the economy, but also be clear the sacrifices we need to make. I, for one, have been fortunate enough. I'm prepared to pay more tax. I'm prepared to pay more for my Medicare. I have the ability to do that. Millions of Americans are ready to step up and sacrifice if we get a leader like you that's prepared to articulate what we need to do.
Thank you for raising that. I agree with you. I think every defining moment of truth for this country has brought out the very best in us as a country. The Great Depression, World War II, the challenges that we face right now with climate or gun violence or healthcare. The reason we're all gathered in this room is because we all care. We're not dividing along party or geography or faith or gender. We're coming together as a country. And yes, it will involve some level of sacrifice. And the greatest amount should be expected from those who hold the greatest wealth and opportunity in this country at a time of extraordinary income and wealth inequality. We could begin by rolling back the worst excesses of the Trump tax cuts. Those people of the future to whom I refer, they will not be able to believe that at a time, at that moment, we were $21 trillion in debt, and now, as you just suggested, we're adding $1 trillion to it every year. That our solution to that, with $4 trillion in outstanding infrastructure needs, so many unable to afford health care, that we cut a $2 trillion tax break to the very wealthiest, to corporations sitting on record piles of cash. We took a corporate tax rate from 35 down to 21.
No way.
You take it not all the way back up, but just to the mid-20s, you could generate $400 to $500 billion over the next 10 years to begin to invest in some of these needs that we have as a country, some of these opportunities that we have as a country. These wars that we are fighting have added trillions of dollars to the debt that we have right now. They've caused us to take tens of thousands of lives in your name and mine, to sacrifice American lives in wars that have no definition of victory today, no commonly understood strategy to achieve that, no understanding of the end or the cost or the consequence. So the choices we make about where we spend our resources. What we prioritize as a country here and overseas will define the opportunities, the future, and the fortune of those who will succeed us. So I want to make sure that we all come together as Americans, shared sacrifice, but expecting more from those who have more, making decisions that invest in this country and our opportunities and our problems now. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So it's okay if you say no, but will you go to prom with me?
First of all, as someone who did not go to prom, because no one asked me, I'm really touched. This means more to me than you know. But somebody told me about your sign, and so we came up with a counter proposal. Will you practice for me? Okay. Thank you so much.
Hi. So first of all, thank you so much for coming out here to meet with us all. We really appreciate when folks come out on this side of the state. My question for you is, what would you say to someone who might say, we have had 44 out of the past 45 presidents that were straight white men, though, well, Buchanan maybe not, but how would you answer someone who says, you know what, it's time for us to move on and maybe move away from yet another straight white man?
I really think that you hold the answer to that question, as does everyone else who's going to participate in the nominating process. All I can do is offer myself, my experience, my story, living in one half of the largest binational community in the hemisphere. El Paso, Texas, one of the safest places, not despite the fact that we're a city of immigrants, but because we're a city of immigrants. At a time that the president, for whatever his motive, has successfully trained the focus of this country on our connection to the rest of the world. That's where I live. That's where I'm raising my kids. Those are the people I represented in Congress. At a time that we're worried about partisanship and division and polarization, I just ran a campaign in Texas, went to every single one of the 254 counties, including those that you can see glowing red as you orbit the Earth from outer space. Places like King County that voted for Trump, I think 96%. In the last election, I showed up there because they're every bit as deserving of our respect, of being heard, of being listened to, of being learned from, of being fought for, of being served. That's the way that I campaigned. That's the way that I served when I was office. That's what I can bring to this race, and I hope to this country. Now, ultimately, the choice is yours, and I'm well aware that come summer 2020, we will have selected a nominee. And it's incumbent upon all of us, myself included, to make sure that she or he is as successful as they can be, again, not just in November of that year, but in January of 2021, to begin to fulfill our promise as a country and achieve our priorities. So you've got my commitment, win, lose, or draw, to do everything I can to make this country successful. Thank you for the question.
I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of hands up, but we only have time for a few more.
A recent amount of school shootings that have been occurring, what is your stance on how are you going to make sure that our children are able to go to school without that fear?
So last spring, our 8-year-old Henry was coming home from first grade, world-class public school, amazing teacher who I've already made the case goes through so much, is not paid her true value. When we asked Henry what he had done that day, he told us that his teacher had helped him and his classmates huddle into a closet and resist the temptation to open the door when somebody impersonating an active shooter during an active shooter drill was banging on that door, demanding that they open up. And I'm thinking, why are we asking this teacher who's trying to teach Henry how to read and how to add and how to subtract, is pulling money out of her own pocket to make sure that his classmates are okay in too many instances, also has to confront the possibility that she may be asked to stand between my child, other parents' children, and a shooter who comes into that classroom. Now, in the shooting that took place at Santa Fe High School in Texas, you may have seen the news coverage that very day. One of the most chilling moments, they interviewed a young woman, one of the students who had survived the shooting. And the reporter asked, was that a shock? Did that surprise you that someone came in and began to kill your classmates? And she said, no, I expected that would happen sooner or later. We lose 30,000 plus of our fellow Americans every single year to gun violence. No country even comes close to this. So you can draw one of two conclusions. This is a natural disaster visited upon us by God. We are deserving of this. We are evil. We are bad. We are violent inherently. Or this is a human-caused problem with a human-based solution. We have seen from those states that have adopted universal background checks a near 50% reduction in gun violence. Gun owners, non-gun owners, Republicans, Democrats alike get it. That there's a responsibility that comes with owning a gun. And I want you to be able to own that gun, to hunt, for self-protection, for sport, for collection. As long as it's safe, I don't care. But I also think, and this is a little bit more contentious, and not everyone in the room is going to agree, and just know from the outset, I respect the conclusion that you come to on this. But there are some weapons, some firearms, that were designed and engineered and sold to the United States military for the sole purpose of killing people, effectively, efficiently, in as great a number as possible. I believe that we should no longer sell those kinds of military-style weapons into our community. So I'm going to follow you on this. Young people walking out of their classrooms, leading the marches for our lives, they're the ones who are going to force this change. And so thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
So, Beto, something that I really admire about you is how you're willing to work with Republicans alike, because that's something that's very important in such a divisive political society that we live in today. Something that I'm looking forward to is your answer on my question, which is, do you believe it is hypocritical for the U.S. to say we support human rights, then also support regimes like Israel and Saudi Arabia?
So we've got to live our values and our foundational principles. We've got to do what's in the best interests of the American people first. I would argue that our relationship with Israel meets those conditions. Israel is our strongest and closest ally in the Middle East, is one of the strongest functioning democracies in that part of the world. Imperfect in a way that other countries are imperfect, including the United States of America. But a country with whom we have a very special and very long-standing relationship, without which it's questionable whether that state would have survived, without which it's questionable whether that state will survive going forward. So I just want to begin at the outset by saying that I strongly support the U.S.-Israel relationship. I also want to make sure that you know that I also strongly support a two-state solution, which is the only way that I can think of that we can assure the full human rights of Israelis and Palestinians, their security and their safety. And I think the United States has a role to play in that region and in securing it. You asked about Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not a democracy. If there is an opposite, it is Saudi Arabia. We have our challenges in Iowa in treating women equally. I mentioned the pay gap between what men and women earn for the same job. In Saudi Arabia, women are not treated as full human beings with human rights in that country. In Saudi Arabia, you have a net exporter of violence, jihadism, and intolerance that is spread throughout the Middle East and other parts of the world. In Saudi Arabia, you have a country that is indiscriminately bombing its neighbor in Yemen, bringing 7 million people to the brink of starvation and disaster in one of the most water-scarce countries on the face of the planet. And in Saudi Arabia, let's admit it, you have a partner of the United States. We are functionally a co-combatant in that war in Yemen, as if we did not have enough on our table in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and in Somalia. We are in Yemen tonight as well. And we are a party to what is going on right now. Hospitals being bombed, school buses being bombed. To what end? It's also a country that murders journalists with impunity. It's a country that's faced no consequences, and it's a country that our president is willing to turn a blind eye to for the arms and weapons sales that we profit from in this country. So yes, we've got to live our values and our ideals and our prioritization of human rights, everyone's human rights ever. We should no longer partner with that monarchy, with that regime in Saudi Arabia, certainly not in this war in Yemen, not in the human rights violations in their own countries. And there should be justice for those whose lives have been taken by that country, including Khashoggi, a journalist who is based here in the United States of America. Thank you very much.
These are going to be the last two.
Okay.
Thank you for opening with climate change and the existential threat that it is. My question is, do we have to make tough choices and say goodbye to the Carolina barrier islands, to Manhattan, South Beach, coastal Louisiana, and New Orleans, or do we save them all?
It's a really good question. I mean, the choice that we're making right now along this trajectory, something that we've known has been happening since the 1950s, something that we almost were able to take decisive action on in the 1980s. Here we are in 2019, and we are the lone country to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement, the 194 or so countries on the face of the planet today. So we're going to lose all of that if we do not do anything. My understanding is even in the best of circumstances, even if we were to stop emitting greenhouse gases this minute with the snap of our fingers, we're going to lose so much more of what is valuable and precious. Coral reefs in so many parts of the world. Coastal communities. I was just in Charleston, South Carolina. It floods in Charleston, South Carolina every time that it rains in Charleston, South Carolina. In Houston, Texas, I mentioned those 3 500-year floods in just 5 years. They have not finished rebuilding from the last one before the next one hits. And I guarantee you there's going to be another one. Sooner or later, it's going to be sooner rather than later. El Paso, Texas, my hometown, where my dad was born, where his dad was born, where Ulysses and Henry and Molly were born, may not be able to sustain human life, as will much of the desert Southwest going forward along this current trajectory. So absolutely, we've got to do everything we can for everyone that we can right now. And it's really, really important that we look squarely in the face the disasters that we see. Stop calling them purely natural disasters. It's not natural for the Missouri River to do what the Missouri River just did. There's a human cause to so much of this, and I guarantee there's a human solution. But this is the test of all tests. This is our defining moment of truth. And as I said at the outset, we cannot be found wanting. So you have my full, complete, entire commitment to do everything that is humanly possible, that begins with using the most extraordinary, powerful mechanism devised by humankind to call forth the power of our fellow humans, and that's a democracy. We've got to make sure that this works and that it works for everyone and everyone is brought into it. So thank you for the question. You got my commitment.
We got our last question.
Thank you for being here first and foremost, but my question is, I think one of the most inspiring things about campaign season in general is just the amount of people who show up and they want to be a part of something.
Yeah.
So as president, not unlike trickle-down economics, which doesn't work, with no disrespect to the office, what would your plan be as president to help support ground-up policies so that all of us who want to get involved, whether it's locally, with the state or in DC, how can we do that when elections over in the ballot box is the only voice we have?
Love the question. And this absolutely gets to the last question. It is democracy and it is the power of people. And I'll tell you, when I was on the city council in El Paso, a nonpartisan position, I was neither a Democrat nor a Republican, I was just an El Pasoan. I held a town hall meeting every single week. I'd explain the votes that I had just taken, I'd explain the agenda coming up, and then I'd listen to your questions, your comments, hear about the dog barking in your neighbor's yard that you wanted me to do something about. Even though I couldn't, I'd listen. But very often I got great ideas about economic development, about how to better manage our system of parks and to ensure that we could afford to have more parks. In Congress, every single month, all comers welcome, no holds barred. You could come if you loved me to those meetings, and my mom often did. Or you could come if you were disappointed in a vote that I had taken, you had a burning question you wanted to ask, or you wanted to get something off your chest. And not only would you do that to me at the microphone, but the 300 or 400 people who showed up, they got to listen to you as well. That was democracy in action. And I got to tell you, I went into every single one of those meetings with a little bit of fear in my gut. I was going to face my constituents, those who placed me in this position of public trust, meet those to whom I'm accountable and for whom I serve. and I was going to have an accounting. Why did you vote for that, Beto? Or what are you going to do on this bill for veterans that you've been talking about? I've seen no progress from you. That was so compelling to me to find that Republican partner, because if I showed up again, I said the Republicans don't care about veterans, my community would call BS on me and would throw me out of office, as they should. I feared them. And that's the way it should be. And so I went and found that Republican colleague. We got it passed. We protected public lands. Got it signed into law by President Trump. Worked on border security with John Cornyn. I was compelled by my constituents. The best ideas, the bills that we turned into laws, originated in conversations like these. So as president, I will require every single one of my cabinet secretaries to hold a real town hall every single month. Not theatrical, not ceremonial, not just to check the box, but real tough questions, because I understand what that does. You go into those meetings talking to your team, you say, hey, I know at the last one we promised we were going to do X, Y, and Z. Where are we on these things? Because I know someone's going to ask me. Veteran showed up, said he couldn't get into the VA last month. I want to make sure that he's had his appointment. I want to know how he is doing. It forces accountability. We need that at every single level of government, from school board to the presidency. So I'll make sure that you get that from the executive branch in our administration. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Cynthia is telling us that was our last question, but we are going to hang out a little while. If anyone would like to take a picture or say hello, we'll be here in the back of the room.